Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Julie and I'm with the programming department here at Woodbridge Library. Thank you all for attending tonight's program, Meet the Editor, All Worlds Wayfarer Literary Magazine. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to check out our other upcoming events. So you can go to our website at www.woodbridgelibrary.org and click on the calendar to see everything and to register. I'd also like to remind you all that everyone is going to be on mute for the duration of the program. That's just to keep the focus on our speaker. If you have any questions, you can put them right in the chat or send them to me directly, and we will do a Q&A at the end. So, okay, all right, I'd like to welcome the co-editor of All Worlds Wayfarer magazine, Geri Meyers. Geri, thank you so much for coming. I will turn things over to you now.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Geri. I will just start by letting you know my internet's been a little spotty tonight. So if I suddenly freeze, then I'll be back in a minute. So don't even worry about it. So we're going to start. I'm going to talk a little bit about All Worlds Wayfarer today. And if you give me just a moment to share my screen, then I have a PowerPoint. All right. So All Worlds Wayfarer is an online literary magazine. We started just about 2 years ago. We specialize in character and theme-driven speculative fiction. We publish fiction in flash fiction length, which is 1,000 words or less, and short story length, which we accept up to 5,000 words. And we release quarterly on the solstices and the equinoxes. The current issue is always free to read on our website, and it's available. We've started releasing the Kindle version a week early. So if you do choose to purchase the issue, you can get it a little earlier. We usually average between 12 and 14 stories per issue. We do a range of horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and magical realism. So some people, they don't always know what speculative fiction is. It's a broad category of genres that include elements that don't exist in the real world. So we prefer to accept, like I said, science fiction, fantasy, horror, and magical realism. But we especially like stories that blend these genres. And so science fiction is based on imagined future scientific or technological advances and major social or environmental changes, frequently portraying space or time travel and life on other planets. We get a lot of sci-fi submissions, probably more than all the other genres, which is great because we love it. But we get a lot of post-apocalyptic, we get life on other planets, we get aliens, and fantasy involves unreal elements such as magic, non-human beings, and imaginary worlds, but it usually lacks in scientific or macabre elements. So this is where we get stories about magical creatures in other worlds. And with horror, that's intended usually to frighten or scare, sometimes disgust. We only accept horror that has speculative elements though. So we like to see like ghost stories or monsters. And for magical realism, it usually paints a realistic view of the modern world while also adding magical elements, and often deals with the blurring of the lines between fantasy and reality. So these are, you might see it's a normal setting like anywhere in the world right now, but there's like a magic item or something to that effect. A little history on All Worlds Wayfarer. We originally started the magazine because I met Rowan through a writing group ages ago. And one day I was like, oh, wouldn't it be so nice if I could be the one who was picking which stories got accepted and published, because I knew so many people whose writing I loved who weren't getting as many acceptances as I thought they should. And it turned out that Rowan had had this idea for this magazine at the time and invited me to join in. So I thought that was great. I didn't know too much about literary magazines at the time, but I really wanted to learn and to join in. So we released our first issue in the summer of 2019 on the summer solstice. And we're about to release our 9th issue, which will be coming out next month. We've also released one anthology, and we are currently running an open call for the second anthology. I'll talk a little more about the anthology in a bit. So for our open calls, we usually put our submissions, we put our open call out on websites like Duotrope and the Submissions Grinder and other websites like that. And also we post on Twitter, and we have a mailing list off our website. People hear about us by word of mouth. We've had people tell us they came from Facebook groups, from announcements in other publications. We get people from all over the world who submit to us, which is really great because we hear stories from everywhere. We usually run 3 open calls per year. 2 are for combined magazine issues and 1 for an anthology. Each open call usually runs about a month, sometimes closer to 2. We average about 150 submissions received for each open call. We generally try to fill about 12 to 14 stories per issue, and for the anthology, we aim for about 28. So we're looking for a lot of stories, so it's pretty great we get so many submissions. Now, if you're interested in submitting to us or to any other online magazine, my best recommendations are to really read the guidelines of where you're submitting. If you do use a website like Duotrope or the Submissions Grinder, there's usually a link to the website that belongs to the publication. So you can certainly read them, and don't self-reject. Sometimes your story might fit more than you think, but it is important to read those guidelines. So if you know the magazine you're submitting to is speculative, it's good to send a speculative story. And also, if you have any questions, you can always email the place that you're submitting to. We have an email account specifically for questions on our website at allworldswayfarer.com. And we're always happy to answer any questions that people ask us. So our process when we are doing an open call, we receive our emails with the submissions, and we send a reception letter to everyone, letting them know the time frame we're expecting to respond. And also so that people who are submitting, they know that we received their story. So when it comes in and we've sent out our reception letter, we place everybody's story in a tracker. And in that tracker, Rowan and I keep track. We mark off which of us read the story. If we liked it, we elevate it to the other one, so the other one will read it. And we mark whether we're going to accept or decline them. If we both like stories, we put them as pending, so that once we've read through all the stories and all the ones that we like, we've set as pending, and we look at them together at the end and decide how many we're going to keep and which ones are our final decisions. When that's done, we send out our final declines to those who didn't make it and our acceptance letters to those who did. And from there, once we've gotten the acceptance of all of those that we accepted, then we have our final lineup and we can start building the issue. When we go to build an issue, there's several things that we need to do. We edit each story individually, and we have to make sure that all the formatting works for our story, for our setup, that everything's uniform. There's a lot of little details that go into that. I actually quite enjoy the little parts of it, making sure that all the quotations are the right way and that all the dashes are the same length, that everything has the correct indents. Those are the little pieces that I really like. And we also double check for typos and anything that might have been missed, like a word that's spelled wrong. And once the editing is done and the formatting, then we find images for each story, and we take a lot of time picking them and cropping them so that they'll fit into our magazine. We also pick a piece of artwork for the cover, and Rowan usually does the design, adding all Worlds Wayfarer, which issue it is. And we put everything together, and then we're able to upload that to Amazon to be sold as a Kindle book, and also to our website when the time comes. We started publishing anthologies last year, which was an excellent experience. We weren't sure that it was going to be a great turnout at first, but we got so many amazing stories. So our first anthology was published December of 2020, and it's called Through Other Eyes, which is an anthology of all stories that are seen from the point of view of a non-human character. So we have 28 stories from authors that we accepted, and we each of the editors put one story in. So there's 30 stories total. Our current open call is for our Prismatic Dreams anthology, which is an LGBTQIA anthology of speculative fiction. We're quite excited about this. We haven't gotten our cover art yet, so we don't have too much to show for it yet, but hopefully we'll have something soon. And we're eagerly reading stories, so that will be coming along shortly. We also have 2 other anthologies that we are planning, Each Our Own and Into the Dark. Each Our Own will be focused on stories with characters who have disabilities, either physical or mental. We're hoping to approach this in a kind and compassionate way. it's sort of a project that we're both really excited about. And Into the Dark will be a story. It'll be an anthology of all dark fantasy and
Oh, I think you may have frozen a bit there.
a little bit, maybe. Sorry about that. So Into the Dark will be our anthology with dark fantasy and fantastical horror. So those are probably going to be released maybe 2022 and 2023, we're hoping. And I talked fast and I've come to the end of my slides. So All Worlds Wayfarer is a project that we've put a lot into it, and we really like to focus on being kind and compassionate, because we know, as both of us are writers ourselves, it can be really hard to put your work out there for other people. And so we make a point of trying to make our rejections kind and compassionate, and to give stories a chance that might not have had a chance at other places. We are particularly fond of stories with queer characters or disabled characters, although we certainly don't limit ourselves to only publishing those stories.
Okay, thank you. So right now, I know it ended a little early, but we can open it up to questions. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. You can, if you want to come off mute, we can do that as well. Just let me know. You can raise your hand or just send me a message. I have a question actually, which is, can you talk a little bit about some common mistakes that people maybe make the first time they're submitting to a magazine?
Sure. Usually, well, for us at least, we usually don't, there isn't much that somebody could do that would make us turn away a submission. The biggest things that we don't particularly like to see are when we receive stories that are hugely outside of our word count. It's really important to read the guidelines and know that you're submitting something that's close to what the magazine or other venue that you're submitting to is looking for. Mostly not reading the guidelines is the only thing I can think of that's really, really important.
Okay, wonderful. And I have a question from Jameson. He says, how many submissions do you take for every open call?
For our open calls, we usually run them until we have a good amount to choose from. So we've sometimes we've run a call that was as short as 2 weeks and we got enough stories. Sometimes the open calls have run about 2 months. We usually end up getting about 150 to 170 to hit the right amount that we're happy with, that we've gotten enough pending stories that we can choose between them and make sure it's really the best issue that we can put together.
Okay, awesome. And I have another question. How detailed are your rejections?
It depends on the story. We have a form rejection letter that we send out. It's as kind and compassionate as we could make it while still being to the point that we are not accepting the story. But we have often at times added details. If there was something about the story particularly that we did like, even though it didn't fit, we like to let the authors know that. And you know, if we have any recommendations that we can see, that if we feel really strongly about them, we might add them into that too.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any more questions? And when is your next open call starting?
You're gonna make me calculate that, huh?
Yeah.
Well, our current open call hasn't ended yet, but our next one, let me see, it's probably, we usually start it about 2 to 3 weeks after a magazine issue is released. So our next one, I believe, is coming out on the June 20th. So we probably, our next open call should be starting early to mid-July.
Okay, and I got a couple more questions here. The first one says, what was the most difficult thing about self-publishing?
Well, we're not really self-publishing because we publish other people. But as far as figuring it out how to do everything, when we did the anthology, we used Ingram Spark, and Ingram Spark requires a lot of filling in details, and they are not always as clear as I would like them to be in what we should expect from them. So figuring everything out was probably the most difficult part of producing the anthology.
Okay, thank you. And another question says, what percentage of submissions are accepted?
I'd like to bring up a calculator for that. If we get about, let's say 170, and we accept generally about 26, about 15 to 20% seems about right.
Take your word for that. So here's okay, Aki says, can you talk a little bit about the future of All Worlds Wayfarer and when you might delve into publishing novellas?
The future of the magazine is pretty much to continue as it is. We want to keep releasing those issues on the equinoxes and the solstices. And we are aiming to release one anthology a year. As for novellas, that's something we've talked about doing, but we have to make sure that we can fund it. And that's always, we have to make sure that we are paying the authors a fair rate for their novellas. So funding is really important. I can't really say at this point when it might happen, but I'm hoping sooner rather than later.
Okay, wonderful. So I will call one last time for any questions. And if not, a question I think that you kind of answered is just, do you pay?
That is a very good question that I meant to go into in further detail and missed it. For the magazine, we pay a token payment of $10 per story. We really wish we could pay more. But at this point in time, that's all we can financially cover. In the future, the dream is to eventually pay standard industry rates, but we're not there yet. For the anthology, we pay $20 per story.
Okay, wonderful. So, okay. Well, I want to thank you again, Geri. It was wonderful and very informative. And I will definitely be sending everyone a follow-up email with links if you want to check those out. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. And I just want to remind everyone again to check out our calendar on the website. You can find out about all of our other programs that we have lined up. I thank you again and have a great night.